In June of 1519, behind thick velvet curtains in the English countryside, a boy was born who shouldn't have mattered. His name, Henry FitzRoy. His mother, Elizabeth Blount, a teenage lady in waiting, not a queen, but his father was the King of England. Henry VIII had already been married to Catherine of Aragon for 10 years, and still no surviving son. The Tudor line, fragile, new, precariously resting on Henry's broad shoulders, faced extinction. So, when young FitzRoy came screaming into the world, the king didn't recoil in shame. He didn't hide the boy. He loved him, and more than that, he saw in him salvation. The name FitzRoy wasn't chosen lightly. It meant son of the king, openly marking him as royal, though illegitimate. Against all precedent, Henry lavished titles upon him: Duke of Richmond, Duke of Somerset, Lord High Admiral of England, titles once reserved for heirs, not bastards. By the time he was 6, FitzRoy had his own palaces, his own court, and advisors whispering of destiny. He was taught to command, not obey. In portraits, he looks hauntingly like his father, the same wide jaw, the same wide jaw, the same restless eyes. And in court, FitzRoy walked like a boy who knew he could be king if only the stars aligned, and his father dared. But in Tudor England, the line between prince and pawn was razor thin. While Henry doted on FitzRoy, the queen simmered. Daughter Mary, legitimate and born of royal womb, watched as her half-brother, a bastard, eclipsed her place. Whispers began to swirl. Would Henry make FitzRoy his heir? Would Parliament allow it? Would the Pope? Or would the child born in secret become the most dangerous boy in England? Because for all his privilege, Henry FitzRoy had something every king fears. Acclaimed by the time FitzRoy was 12, he was no longer just a royal child playing in gardens. He was a political chess piece placed at the center of a growing storm. Henry VIII's desperation for a male heir was no secret. Catherine of Aragon had failed to produce a surviving son, and the king's eyes had already begun to drift toward Anne Boleyn and toward the possibility of annulment. But one unspoken truth hung heavy in the Tudor court. Henry FitzRoy was strong, intelligent, and alive. In 1525, Henry VIII took a bold, unprecedented step. He publicly acknowledged FitzRoy, not just with love, but with power. Named Lord Lieutenant of Ireland and Warden of the Scottish Marches, posts far beyond the comprehension of an adolescent. But it wasn't about governance. It was about preparation. Henry was grooming him for something greater. Education was overseen by the best tutors in England. Latin, theology, statecraft. His letters were praised for their maturity. Foreign ambassadors wrote home in hushed tones, "This bastard may yet be king." The Vatican even received reports that Henry VIII was exploring papal approval to legitimize his son to crown him heir in Mary's place. The English court held its breath. For some, FitzRoy represented stability, a way to secure the Tudor line without plunging the country into a messy divorce. For others, he was an abomination. A bastard in line for the throne meant breaking with centuries of inheritance law, and worse, undermining the queen herself. Mary, the king's legitimate daughter, watched her future bleed away. Catherine, devout and proud, refused to recognize the boy, and Anne Boleyn, waiting in the wings, saw in FitzRoy something far more terrifying than a rival. She saw a threat that couldn't be seduced, outwitted. or controlled. Because FitzRoy wasn't just a boy with a title, he was a symbol, and in Henry's desperate court, symbols had a way of dying. As FitzRoy's favor with his father grew, so did the shadows around him. Behind the court's smiles and ceremonial feasts lurked envy, dread, and something colder. Political calculation. The boy was too popular, too visible, too healthy, and at just 14, he had become the breathing embodiment of everything Queen Catherine could not give, but even more terrifying, he was the king's plan B. Anne Boleyn, now firmly in Henry's sights, understood this all too well. She wasn't merely a lover vying for the king's affection. She was a strategist building a future. And in that future, FitzRoy had no place. Every time FitzRoy was honored, it was an insult to Mary. Every time he was paraded, it destabilized the court. The factions formed quickly. The Aragonese loyalists, who clung to Catherine and Mary as the true royal bloodline. The Boleyn faction, hungry for a clean break from the past. And the silent few, who wondered if Henry would risk civil war to crown a bastard in 1533. FitzRoy was hastily married to Mary Howard, daughter of the powerful Norfolk family, a move many saw as a rehearsal for a future coronation. But the wedding was subdued, strangely quiet. The bride just 15, the groom 16, and sickly whispers began that same year. Anne Boleyn gave birth to Elizabeth, not the son Henry had hoped for. Suddenly, FitzRoy's stock rose again. The old plan to legitimize the boy and make him heir was purportedly revived, but Henry was changing, hardened, paranoid. He had split from Rome, named himself head of the Church of England. Executions became common, and enemies vanished under charges of treason or heresy. And so, those close to FitzRoy began to worry. He was no longer just a beloved son. He was a liability, a rival to the new queen's ambitions, an echo of a future that the crown was trying desperately to erase. He didn't know it yet, but his days were numbered. In the summer of 1536, the air in London was thick with tension. Anne Boleyn had just been executed in a spectacle of cruelty, beheaded at the Tower for treason, adultery, and incest. The court was reeling, shaken by how quickly favor could turn to death. And then, without warning, another blow. Henry FitzRoy fell ill. The official cause, consumption, the dreaded wasting disease we now call tuberculosis. But no doctor of repute ever confirmed it. No extended vigil at court. No desperate royal summons. Just whispers that the king's firstborn was unwell and then gone. He died in July, 17 years old, too young, too sudden, and far too quiet. There was no grand funeral, no pageantry, no national mourning for the boy who had once been whispered about as England's next king. His body was taken in secret from St. James's Palace and buried quietly at Thetford Priory, far from London, far from the throne. Even more chilling, many of his household records, letters, and portraits were destroyed. It was as if FitzRoy had never lived. Many at court were stunned. Even those who disliked FitzRoy were unnerved by the swiftness of it all. Some said he had been sick for months. Others insisted he was fine days before. One ambassador reported that the king had shown no emotion, merely noting that God had taken his will. But this was the same king who had once dreamt of making FitzRoy heir. Why so little grief? Some historians believe the truth was political, that in the wake of Anne Boleyn's fall, and with Jane Seymour now in favor, Henry saw no benefit in reviving the old plan of legitimizing a bastard. Others suggest something darker, that Fitz's death was not natural at all, that he had been removed quietly, cleanly, to prevent factional conflict, or to ensure that no rival would rise if Jane bore a legitimate son. And in Tudor England, such things could happen without question and without justice. Henry FitzRoy, firstborn of the King of England, heir presumptive in everything but law, was buried with neither crown nor clarity. The funeral was hastily arranged. No public procession, no royal banners, no final words from the king. He was laid to rest at Thetford Priory in a monk's tomb, as if he'd never been the son of a monarch, as if his life had been a mistake quietly corrected. For years, the Tudor court would never speak his name aloud. No official portrait of FitzRoy was kept at court. No memorial commission. His death was not recorded in detail in the king's household accounts, a deeply unusual omission. Even the chroniclers, who documented every movement of Henry's court with obsessive precision, treat FitzRoy passing like a footnote, and the king. He did not visit the grave. No monument was built. No mass held in the chapel royal. The very silence screamed. There were rumors that his death had been orchestrated, not by poison, but by neglect, that the king, seeing his dynasty about to be secured through a new queen, simply allowed nature, or court intrigue, to take its course. Jane Seymour would soon be pregnant. The prophecy of a legitimate Tudor prince was finally within reach. What need was there for a bastard with dangerous support and dynastic weight? Some whispered that FitzRoy had been too beloved to link to the old queen's enemies. Others feared what might happen if the boy outlived Henry without being clearly disinherited. Civil war, uprising, a second war of the roses. Better, they thought, that the problem disappear. But even in death, FitzRoy's memory refused to die. His wife, Mary Howard, never remarried. Some claimed she kept his letters until her death. In private, she still called herself the Duchess of Richmond, the title given to her by a king who'd buried her. Husband like a servant. And in court, a phrase emerged, whispered but enduring. There was once a boy who could have been king. FitzRoy's death seemed like the quiet close of a minor chapter. But history tells a different story. Had he lived healthy, legitimate, or not, Henry VIII's reign might have ended in calm succession. A son already trained, already adored by powerful families. A kingdom spared the chaos of what was to come. Instead, his absence created a vacuum, and into that void rushed blood, fire, and madness. In 1537, Jane Seymour gave birth to Edward VI, a sickly child who would reign briefly, die young, and leave behind a power struggle that turned England into a battlefield of religion and legitimacy. Next came Mary I, daughter of Catherine of Aragon, embittered, exiled, and vengeful. Her reign would become synonymous with blood. Hundreds burned at the stake, Protestants slaughtered, a reign defined by fire and ghosts. Then came Elizabeth I, daughter of Anne Boleyn, another child Henry once considered illegitimate. She would inherit a kingdom soaked in betrayal, fractured by decades of succession paranoia. All three of Henry's legitimate children took the throne, and all three ruled alone, without heirs. The Tudor dynasty, built with so much violence, would die with them, and through it all, the boy who never wore the crown loomed like a phantom. Historians still debate whether FitzRoy's death was natural, but what cannot be debated is its impact. It opened the door to the English Reformation, which saw the church torn apart. It fueled Henry's obsession with controlling the line of succession, leading to 6 marriages, countless executions, and the deaths of both queens and councillors. And it began the pattern that defined Tudor rule: eliminate the alternative, whether that alternative is a wife, a minister, or your own son. In FitzRoy's story, we see the price of dynasty, not just in blood spilled, but in futures erased, because England didn't just lose a prince in 1536, it lost the last clear chance at peace. In the centuries since Henry FitzRoy's mysterious death, his legacy has become a haunting specter in Tudor lore, a cautionary tale whispered between the lines of royal history. While his name rarely appears in textbooks, his absence shapes everything that followed. Scholars describe him as the ghost prince, the son who could have ended England's darkest century before it began. A boy born of sin, but perhaps destined to rule more wisely than any of his siblings. His story lingers in portraits and fragments, a face that mirrors Henry VIII so closely it's almost unsettling. In one rare surviving letter, FitzRoy refers to himself as your humble and true son, a glimpse into a relationship far deeper than most monarchs had with their bastards. There are legends, too. Some claimed he didn't die at all, that he was hidden, smuggled abroad to avoid assassination. A few even said he became a secret advisor, watching from the shadows. But most historians agree he died young, silenced before his name could be etched in the line of kings. And yet, we remember him because FitzRoy's tragedy isn't just about a lost heir. It's about the cruel calculus of royal survival. He was everything Henry VIII claimed to want: male, strong, loyal, capable. But in the end, FitzRoy was also expendable. When the path to a legitimate Tudor heir emerged, FitzRoy became inconvenient. And in Tudor England, inconvenience was often fatal. His story also reminds us of how fragile history really is. Had FitzRoy lived just a few more years, had he survived long enough to be named successor, would the Reformation have unfolded the same way? Would Anne Boleyn's head have stayed on her shoulders? Would Mary I's flames have ever been lit? We'll never know, because FitzRoy's crown was never forged, but his ghost sits on the edge of every Tudor throne, watching, waiting. What's most disturbing about FitzRoy's legacy isn't just the premature death or the stolen future. It's how deliberately he was erased. No royal tomb marks his place in Westminster. No schoolchild is taught his name. His life, once filled with parades, titles, and royal ambitions, ends in a footnote. Why? Because acknowledging FitzRoy meant confronting a dangerous truth: that Henry VIII nearly crowned a bastard king, that for a time legitimacy was a matter of convenience, not divine right. And perhaps most damning, that the Tudor dynasty was always more fragile than it appeared. FitzRoy's erasure was political, strategic, a campaign of forgetting. After his death, his titles were redistributed. His widow faded into court life. His allies were reassigned or removed. And the boy who might have united a nation became a dangerous memory, one the crown needed buried alongside his bones. But silence is its own kind of legacy. The records we don't have speak just as loudly as those we do. FitzRoy's medical files, gone. Letters between him and his father, lost. His personal journals, never mentioned again. Even Thetford Priory, his final resting place, was dissolved just a few years later under Henry's own orders. His remains were likely moved or destroyed. No one knows exactly where he lies today. There is no monument, no grave, no inscription, and perhaps that is the most haunting legacy of all, that a prince once groomed for kingship can simply vanish today. Modern historians revisit his story with new eyes in an age obsessed with legacy, lineage, and power. FitzRoy offers a stark lesson that history is not just what happened, it's what those in power allowed us to remember. And behind every silence in the record, there may be a scream that was never heard. FitzRoy never ruled, but in death, he became something more dangerous than a king. He became a secret. FitzRoy's death didn't just close a chapter, it opened a wound that never healed. Every heir who followed bore the scars of his absence. Edward VI, the legitimate son who finally arrived, lived in a gilded cage of expectations. Frail, isolated, manipulated by ambitious regents, a child monarch too young to rule, too sick to survive. He died at 15, leaving behind a failed coup and a country lurching toward collapse. Then came Mary I, the discarded daughter, reinstated through political desperation. Her reign became an exorcism of all the humiliations her mother endured. She turned England into a furnace, burning Protestants by the hundreds. They called her Bloody Mary, but the blood began spilling long before she wore the crown. And then Elizabeth, sharp, defiant, and born of scandal. Her rule was long and legendary, but she never married, never bore children. The Tudor bloodline ended with her. 3 monarchs, 3 traumas, 1 ghost, Henry FitzRoy, the boy who might have ruled, the boy who might have saved them all from the wars of legitimacy, from the executions, the burnings, the fractures in church and crown. But instead, he became a question, an unspoken what if that shadows Tudor history like a curse, because his story is not just about who should have inherited the throne, but how much power people are willing to destroy to keep it. The Tudors were masters of theater, of control, of narrative. And FitzRoy's quiet, unmourned death was the beginning of their mythology. It told the court no one is safe. Not queens, not daughters, not even sons the king once adored. The real horror of FitzRoy's story isn't just that he died, it's that his death was necessary, not for God, not for England, but for the crown. We remember him not because he ruled, but because he was erased. Henry FitzRoy's life was brief, but his shadow stretches across an empire's most violent years. He reminds us that power is built not just on bloodlines, but on the blood that's spilled to protect them. So now I ask you, have you ever heard of a darker fate than this? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if these forgotten stories move you, subscribe for more true tales from history's darkest corridors.